Welcome to episode 2 of the Di Pietro Partners Podcast. I'm Kevin from Borealis Digital Marketing, and as part of our ongoing legal education series, I'll be speaking with healthcare attorney David Di Pietro, the managing partner and CEO of Di Pietro Partners. How you doing, David?
Good morning. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for making time here.
Absolutely.
And David is a well-renowned attorney with decades of experience representing physicians, medical groups, and healthcare businesses across Florida. This includes everything from licensed defense to compliance audits to multi-million-dollar litigation involving hospitals and surgery centers. Today, we'll be focusing on a critical topic for physicians and healthcare entrepreneurs, and that's what you need to know about starting a medical or healthcare practice in Florida. So let's start at the beginning, David. When a physician decides to start a brand new practice, what's the first step they should be considering?
The first step should be the type of entity they're going to form, either an LLC, or a corporation. And people often confuse and they say, "Well, I'm an S-Corp." Well, an S-Corp is a designation by the IRS, and you can be an LLC or a corporation and be an S-Corp. I generally recommend, for a lot of reasons, that medical practices are LLCs or PLLCs. And the reason is there's different structuring down the road, the way we could structure your practice as it grows and you want to add different areas. We can put everything under one tax ID in an LLC, which is a little more difficult to do in a corporation. So generally, I recommend PLLCs or LLCs for purposes of growth and for purposes of compliance with different safe harbors under federal and state law.
Okay, that's good information. And on that note, regarding licensing, what are some state agencies involved in approving a license, particularly Florida?
So for doctors, it's MDs and DOs have their own board. So the osteopathic board and the allopathic board. And then for um, nurses and nurse practitioners, they have their own board in Florida. And podiatrists have their own board. And those boards all report to or are under the Florida Department of Health. So all licensing for professionals goes from the Florida Department of Health to the various boards. Those board members are appointed by the governor, and they set the regulation for those specialties. Then AHCA is a agency for healthcare administration. It regulates hospitals mostly, so or nursing homes and things like that. So they in surgery centers. So they deal more with the facilities, whereas the Department of Health deals with the professionals.
Okay, that's interesting. And then for specialty practices and healthcare businesses, how does that differ? Like, let's say from a physician starting a practice, that's one thing. But what about a healthcare business like DME suppliers, home health agencies, etc.?
So yeah, they all also have to get licensed through AHCA or the Department of Health, depending on what specialty they're trying to do or what service they're trying to provide. So they have to go through the regulatory process. If a physician owns it, sometimes it's less restrictive because the physician's already licensed. So the state of Florida basically wants somebody to have a license that's involved in healthcare. So either it's the practitioner or the facility. So it just depends on the structure. If you're a non-physician and you want to get in the business of healthcare, usually you're going to need some sort of license from either the Department of Health or AHCA.
Okay, and that's important for reasons like audits. If you don't have everything set up properly in the beginning, I assume that can cause problems later on.
Well, if you're unlicensed, one, you could be practicing medicine without a license, which is a crime.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
or or if you don't have the right licensure from AHCA, they can sue you and get an injunction and shut you down pretty fast. So yeah, you can't skirt around the licensure issue.
All right, yeah, absolutely. And after the foundation, when it's time for hiring and expanding, bringing on new employees, when bringing on like staff like nurses or medical assistants, what legal issues should doctors or healthcare professionals be prepared for?
Well, one is you got to understand what a nurse and a medical assistant can do and what they can't do, what needs physician monitoring and what doesn't. like drawing blood, obviously, a medical assistant can do, but certain other procedures that, or like injecting for Botox and things like that, a nurse practitioner can do it, but a nurse cannot. So you got to know the limitations of what the license allows and who can do what.
That's an important distinction. Um, and I know employment and non-competes has kind of been a hot topic in Florida, particularly. Are these still enforceable in Florida? From the limited amount of research I've done, it seems like Florida treats it a little differently than other states.
Yeah, they're absolutely enforceable. Yeah, and they're usually in a physician contract, and physicians negotiating with a practice to join a practice should absolutely have a lawyer help them negotiate the non-competes. But in order to enforce a non-compete, you just have to prove that you're protecting a legitimate business interest. So if you do a non-compete over the whole state of Florida and your practice is in Miami, it's probably too expansive, but it doesn't mean it's illegal. The court will just narrow it down to protecting the legitimate business interest. So if you work for a hospital system and they get patients from multiple counties, and they ask for a multiple county non-compete, it could be enforceable.
Oh wow! So it differs even by county in Florida.
Yeah, it really so the geographic area all depends on how big of the practice you're joining or the hospital system you're joining. How big is their what we call the catchment area? How big are they pulling patients? So if they're pulling patients from a large area, and they can that's the larger the area, they can show that they're pulling patients and that you were introduced to their patients. They can then enforce a larger non-compete. If it's a smaller area, then the non-compete needs to be smaller in scope.
Okay, that's great information. Let's talk about insurance and risk management. I know medical malpractice insurance is one of the key ones, I assume. Is there any other types of coverage, or can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so if you have hospital privileges and you're a doctor, you have to have at least 250, what we call 250, 750 policy, 250,000 in liability insurance and 750,000 aggregate. If you don't go to the hospital, you can drop that down to 100, 300. And if you have no insurance, what we call going bare, then you have certain requirements under the law to make sure if you do get a judgment, you have to pay up to the $250,000 judgment. Otherwise, your license can be in jeopardy. If you were to have a medical malpractice, go to trial and lose, you had $1 million judgment. You would at least need to satisfy 250,000 of it in order to keep your license.
Okay. And now we've talked a little bit about the foundation and licensing as well as hiring and expanding. How about for like planning for growth and exits? Should physicians be thinking about exit plan right away with their merger, succession, day one? Let's talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, I think so because private equity is buying up medical practices like crazy now.
Really?
So yeah, so you really, if you're in a position where you built up your practice and you want to onboard it to a bigger private equity type, practice, you definitely need a lawyer to help you negotiate that, and where you essentially become an employee, but they pay you out on all your equity, which would be a capital gain versus income, and you can really, I've seen multiples of revenue EBITDA that we call. I've seen multiples of 5 to 15 times your EBITDA, so it could be a big number. So
Wow.
if you're in your 50s and you got 10 years left to work, it could be a good way to really plan for your retirement.
All right, great. And in general, how can a healthcare lawyer at Di Pietro Partners help a physician or healthcare professional successfully start and grow their practice?
We can help you from beginning and forming the entity, forming the operating agreements, providing any advice on informed consents, reviewing any HIPAA disclosures, and any other compliance or regulatory issue, drafting contracts for other physicians that are in the practice, partnership agreements if you're joining with another person. We can help structure that early. So if you have to have a business divorce down the road, those things have already been contemplated.
All right, that's important. Well, thank you very much, David. This has been very informative. And until next time.
See you, buddy. Thank you.